A virtual world unfolds, where people plunder and slaughter one another as if they're in a game of GTA. The leader of a famous guild, known as the Knights of Glory, Master Devea, has just received word from one of her spies that a dangerous assassin named Rate has appeared. One member pointed out that it's normal for assassins to be deployed before a castle siege begins. However, Devea replied that this assassin is especially powerful, and they'll have to give it their all just to have a chance against him. Shortly after, Master Devea spotted a flock of birds flying towards them and ordered her guild members to shoot them all down. However, the guild members thought attacking the birds was just a pointless waste of time, but those weren't ordinary birds. They were mechanical birds controlled by Rate. They were in position and began to counterattack the guild. A massive explosion occurred, and unfortunately, Master Devea was the only one to take the fatal blow. She lay on the ground, her skin looking like an overcooked steak. Her teammates screamed her name in anguish. Suddenly, Devea played her trump card and was instantly revived, with magical circles swirling around her head and body. Devea said it was all thanks to the sacrificial magic tool she wears around her neck. This item can substitute for its wearer when they take a fatal hit, and it's powerful enough to let them cheat death. A truly rare feat. Everything was orchestrated by Rate, making the guild members realize his true level of danger. Devea also warned that the sacrificial magic tool has its limits and needs time to reactivate, so they can't let their guard down like before. Just moments later, Devea noticed something strange on the ground, but before she could figure it out, she was engulfed by the flames of another explosion. She collapsed, her body weak and exhausted. Suddenly, a pillar crumbled and fell right on top of her. With her last breath, Devea began to wonder how there could be explosives in this building. She wondered if this entire situation was Rate's plan, and if the explosives could have been planted when the building was first constructed. Shortly after, one of Rate's mechanical birds circled the area, controlled by him from his headquarters, to inform Devea that the last explosion was no ordinary one, but a magic energy injection device. Just then, the mechanical bird reported that Rate had just received a new message, congratulating him on completing his mission. As a result, he received a gold ingot as a reward. Rate explained that normally, the maximum depth at which an explosion can affect someone on the surface is 5 meters. Any explosion deeper than that would have no effect, as the blast energy would be absorbed by the ground. However, that's only true for conventional explosives. What Rate used was a magic energy injection device. When pumped with a huge amount of magic, it will detonate from even the slightest impact. Rate went on to explain that no matter how solid your assassination techniques are, someone will always find a counter. But that doesn't matter to him because no matter how many countermeasures people prepare, Rate will always invent a new way to assassinate them with his production skills. For him, that's how things are, and always will be. The production job is exactly what it sounds like, a class that creates things. However, the real-life Rate was unemployed and a failure, so he decided to do the next best thing, become an assassin in a VR MMO, because his real life was just too bleak and hopeless. The name of this game is Virtual Life Online, or VLO. In VLO, death is a serious matter, because when a player dies, they lose 1 level. Not only that, but they're also banned from logging in for 3 days, which has severe consequences, especially for high-level players. Losing 1 level means losing 100 hours of gameplay. All that effort reduced to something as worthless as a cheap can of chopped liver, but the game's developers were unforgiving. They even created a harsher penalty, a complete login ban for an extended period. For example, if a guild war over territory breaks out and a guild's main force is taken down and can't log back in time for the fight, that guild is guaranteed to lose. Many guilds have suffered from having their key players eliminated at the worst possible moment, leading to their complete collapse during crucial wars. However, in VLO, actual player death is rare. In the worst-case scenario, players are just knocked unconscious and need to be revived in town. only a handful of major bosses and a few other players, are actually capable of successfully killing another player. If you get killed too often, just like in any other MMO, you'll be considered useless. In battles between top-tier guilds, each side usually hires dozens of assassins for support. So, it's not uncommon to see 2 or more assassins clashing, especially when it comes to assassination battles. Rate is considered an exceptional assassin, recognized by everyone, except for his family. He isn't your typical assassin with boring artery-slicing skills or dual-wielding swords. Instead, he has a production job and uses poisons and explosives to eliminate his enemies. Rate knows full well that he'd lose in a direct confrontation. But he doesn't have to, because his methods of assassination have no counter. To put it in perspective, if an assassin targets a high-level guild, they're considered excellent if they have a success rate of 15% or higher. However, Rate's assassination success rate is over 99.9%. Statistically, this means failure is virtually impossible for him. Model. Rate had taken on over 1,000 assassination missions and had only failed once. He was confident his success rate was the highest among all assassins in VLO. As Rate was strolling through the city, he suddenly received a letter, not the usual kind he was used to. He opened it and saw it was from a player named Goddess Mises, who was asking for his help. Rate wondered who Goddess Mises was and immediately thought it had to be a joke, because in VLO there were restrictions on character names. Any name containing the word God or 69 was forbidden. This only strengthened his belief that the letter was a pointless scam, especially since the sender called herself Goddess Mises. Despite not believing she existed, Rate searched for the name Goddess Mises, thinking that if she were real, he'd be able to hear her voice. To his surprise, the device connected successfully, and he heard her voice clearly. Rate immediately asked how she was able to use a name containing the word God and whether the ban had been lifted. Goddess Mises replied that she had that name because she was, in fact, a god, and also the one who created the game. With her admin privileges, she could choose any name she wanted, even God Slayer 69. Rate heard this but didn't believe a word of it. Her claim of being the game's creator made Rate wonder just how delusional this person was. Even so, he decided to play along with her story and asked for the mission details. She explained that the mission was to assassinate a god from another world, known as Masura Zul. Since Rate knew the names of all the powerful players by heart, he realized he'd never heard of this name before, and quickly concluded it would be an easy target. All he needed was the target's location. Rate was focused, committed, and very professional, so he immediately asked about the reward for this mission, requesting to be paid in gold. Mises agreed and offered to pay him 1,000 tons of pure gold. Since Rate had been broke his entire life, he couldn't believe his ears when she proposed such a massive reward. He demanded that she be serious about the payment, but Mises was serious about the 1,000-ton gold reward, equivalent to 5 million yen, although she would pay the entire sum on the other side. Rate still didn't believe it and wondered when she would snap out of her delusion. However, he suddenly changed his mind and decided to accept the mission with a smirk. Mises was pleased to hear this and thanked him, saying that if he hadn't accepted, she would have considered herself as good as dead. Rate thought she was being a bit overdramatic, since this was just a game. However, Mises insisted that this was no ordinary game. Just then, Rate noticed his teleportation stone had suddenly activated. This was strange, because teleportation stones never activate on their own. As the magical energy enveloped his body, Mises mentioned that she didn't have a chance to explain what was happening, so she would send him to the target immediately. Amid the chaos, Rate demanded time to prepare, as he was terrible at close combat and needed information about the target to prepare countermeasures. However, Mises said that he couldn't bring any foreign items with him, which rendered all his plans useless. This left Rate completely helpless, as he wouldn't be able to bring his poisons or explosives, the very things he relied on for assassinations. Mises also explained that the teleportation stone would take him to another world, which Rate didn't understand at all. However, Goddess Mises believed that Rate was the most suitable person for this mission, as his skills and knowledge would be incredibly useful in that other world. His target was the evil god Masura Zul, the only remaining god in that world. Rate appeared in a green meadow, with his hand on the ground, wondering where he was. He observed a lush green forest, full of trees and animals, so he decided to use his GPS to pinpoint his location. However, when he opened his item box, he was stunned to find it completely empty. It turned out Goddess Mises wasn't joking when she said he couldn't bring any foreign items into this world. Rate began to wander through the strange forest, which looked very similar to the landscapes in VLO, but the quality was far too sharp and realistic for a game. This sight made him slowly begin to believe Mises's words, that he had truly been brought to another world. Just then, the voice of Goddess Mises came from the communication device he had used to call her earlier. Mises apologized for sending Rate to the wrong location, explaining that her power wasn't strong enough. The population of her believers had sharply declined, preventing her from using her full power. Rate was still confused, not understanding what she was talking about. Mises went on to explain that the source of a god's power is the faith of their believers. If a god loses all their believers, they lose their power and eventually vanish. When a god disappears, all memories of them also vanish from the world. Rate realized that being a god wasn't easy at all. Mises also informed him that all the other gods had been wiped out by the evil god Masura Zul. At last, Rate understood the situation, realizing he had been summoned by a goddess in her final moments to assassinate her rival god. Rate then asked the obvious question. Besides Mises and Masura Zul, were all the other gods really gone? Goddess Mises confirmed that was true. Mises also said that Masura Zul had many disciples, and their purpose was to reduce the number of followers of other gods. These disciples would even murder the followers of other gods or torture them until they changed their beliefs. Suddenly, the goddess's holographic image began to fade, as she hadn't subscribed to an unlimited service plan and had run out of energy to maintain contact. Rate panicked and begged her not to abandon him in this terrifying forest, but Mises could only speak in broken sentences due to the poor connection. Her last words were that when her power returned, she would definitely give him the promised reward. Rate realized he had been thrown into the wilderness like trash and now had to fend for himself. However, he didn't regret taking this mission, as he found it quite interesting. Rate decided to see to his own safety before starting the assassination campaign. He wandered through the forest but found no trace of human life. Rate recalled that although he couldn't bring any external items, he could still use his basic VLO skills. He activated his enemy search skill and detected numerous monsters in the forest, which he assessed as a medium threat. Rate quickly concluded that this forest wasn't safe. Then he used magic to create pure water and realized that if he could use magic, he could also use his production skills. This led him to believe he could live a pretty easy life in this world. Rate realized he needed to gather items quickly if he didn't want to become Monster Chow. First, he needed to find metal. And after scouting the forest, he discovered some bauxite. But this wasn't Minecraft, so he had to mine and craft it by hand. He placed 2 fingers on the bauxite ore and activated his extraction skill, obtaining about 500 grams of pure aluminum. Rate then used his shaping skill to craft a needle from the collected aluminum. Although this needle dealt very little damage, he found a way to compensate for that weakness. He bent down and plucked a poisonous plant called death root, extracted the toxic sap from its roots, and coated the needle's tip, creating a makeshift weapon. However, Rate knew this weapon wouldn't be strong enough against high-level monsters. Rate tried to open his item box and check his status, but the system completely ignored him. The status screen didn't appear, proving that this environment was completely different from the VLO game. Not only that, but he also had no items, making it impossible for him to accurately measure his own strength. The only way to gauge his power was by using his skills. So he activated the martial arts skill Crush Kick to destroy a tree trunk. This was a reasonable measure of his strength, and he realized his attack skills were as powerful as he'd expected. He assumed his stats in this world were equivalent to his VLO stats. As it started to get dark, Rate decided to build a house to live in. He used his shaping skill to craft an aluminum saw, then used it to cut trees into logs and stack them in a triangular shape. Despite having arms as weak as spaghetti, he still managed to dig a foundation, preparing for the build. However, he didn't build the house in a boring, manual way. With the help of magic, he could erect the house in a matter of minutes. After it was finished, Rate stepped inside and enjoyed the new house smell. But he quickly realized the house was too big for one person to live in alone, spacious enough to host a huge party, yet lacking the most important thing: friends. He then decided he needed to get more food and, more importantly, find some mana stones. Rate wanted to craft artifacts, which were items that use mana stones as a power source to activate various types of magic. However, mana stones could only be found inside monster bodies, and they had to be manually retrieved. And so he decided it was time to hunt. The amount of aluminum he'd collected wasn't enough to craft a proper melee weapon, and poison needles would contaminate the prey's meat. He decided to use a piece of wood, combined with his transformation skill, to craft a wooden bow. Next, he needed a bowstring, but making one was no simple task. Rate extracted fibers from a plant stalk, and while the fibers were still elastic, he wove them into thread. Then he braided the threads together to increase their durability. After a painstaking crafting process, the bow was complete. He also crafted some arrows from the leftover aluminum. With everything ready, Rate entered the forest and used his enemy search skill. He detected the nearest enemy in the 2 o'clock direction, so he climbed onto a branch, striking a pose so professional even Green Arrow would be impressed. Rate spotted a large frog sitting on a rock and wondered if it was edible. He fired an arrow, which flew true and pierced the frog's side. However, the arrow wasn't strong enough to take down the frog. The frog, enraged, spotted the location of the shot and quickly leaped towards the tree where Rate was standing. It jumped very high, approaching the branch where Rate stood. But when it got there, Rate was gone, as if to say, "Not this time, pal." Rate appeared right below the frog, at the perfect angle to land a fatal shot on the ugly creature. Even though many arrows had pierced its body, the frog refused to give up and prepared to unleash one final attack. It shot its disgusting tongue towards Rate, but at the same time, he fired a precisely calculated shot, aiming straight for its uvula. As soon as the arrow hit its mark, he calmly said, "When one shot isn't enough, you just need to add a few more." After completing the mission, Rate returned home and began to think about how to prepare the frog meat. Apparently, he decided to cook the frog meat he had just hunted. After finishing his meal, Rate noted that the frog meat tasted like chicken. However, he thought to himself that perhaps this wilderness life was making him go crazy for the food to seem so appealing. With this hearty meal, his survival had now switched to super easy mode. However, monster frog meat wasn't the kind you could eat carelessly, as it contained about 10 poison sacs. Rate was careful not to break any of the sacs, because if he did, the entire cut of meat would be poisoned. In the end, he had obtained a mana stone. And based on the monster frog's strength, this mana stone was equally as powerful. That meant this stone would be very useful to him. At this point, he had food, a mana stone, and had defeated a monster. Now, his ultimate goal was to destroy the evil god Masura Zul, though he still wasn't sure about the god's evil nature. Besides, he hadn't fully trusted the goddess Meses from the start. But that no longer mattered to Rate, as he had accepted the contract with goddess Meses, and his mission was to eliminate the target, no further arguments needed. A few minutes later, Rate decided to create some artifacts using the mana stones obtained from the ugly frog. He sat down and decided he would craft an artifact capable of detecting magic. However, he only had a vague memory of the production process, and the available materials were quite scarce. But he decided to give it a try anyway. Rate used his transmutation skill to craft a tool that resembled a magic hammer, used to imbue magic into materials. He began to strike the metal surface with this tool, and the process of crafting the artifact officially began. The artifact he was creating would be used to detect magic, that is, the sources of magical power used to cast various kinds of spells. Wright knew that both animals and monsters could possess magical power. However, only humans could use this artifact, meaning it would only activate when a person used magic nearby. After a period of continuous hammering, a spike formed at the tip of the initially rectangular metal plate, acting as an antenna to increase the device's sensitivity. It was no exaggeration to say that the quality of the magic detector depended entirely on the power of the mana stone and the spike used to craft it. Therefore, the spike wasn't made with Wright's transmutation skill, but was slowly imbued with magic and shaped, while enchantments were layered on one by one. Simply put, transmutation magic couldn't compare to forging and enchanting. After a while, the spike was saturated with magic and had reached its limit. This was the maximum the material could withstand, so Wright decided that the device was complete. He then chanted Bind and Bestow, marking the completion of the magic detector. Wright believed the device could detect any magic within a 1-kilometer radius, but he wanted to test it anyway. He used magic to fill a cup with pure water, and the device immediately detected it. That proved the device worked correctly. Wright took a sip of water, enjoying the fruits of his labor. But just then, his stomach rumbled with a fierce hunger, signaling it was time for dinner. Wright took the frog meat he had obtained earlier, skewered it, and placed it around the campfire to roast. He sat down by the campfire and tried to use his forge fire skill to light it. However, after attempting to cast the spell, Wright was exhausted and out of mana. So, he decided to conserve his magic power and use only the minimum amount necessary. A moment later, the fire was blazing and the meat began to cook in the heat. Wright was about to take the meat off to eat, but decided to leave it on the fire a little longer. He also hoped that this meal wouldn't give him diarrhea, since he hadn't built a toilet yet, and didn't want to create an awkward situation in his pants. Suddenly, his 2 brain cells rubbed together, and he came up with a brilliant idea. He decided to indulge in a bit of luxury by seasoning the meat with salt. Once the meat was cooked through and perfectly salted, Wright blew on it lightly to cool it down, then took the first bite. He was amazed that just a little salt could make such a big difference in flavor. Wright had assumed the frog meat would be very bland, but in reality, it was surprisingly fatty. After the meal, looking at the leftover meat, he began to wonder what he would do with it. Wright wanted to find a way to preserve the meat, but realized he would need a mana stone to create a refrigerator or freezer. However, the only way to get a mana stone was to fight monsters, and he was in no mood for that. So, he thought about storing the meat in his item box, but was afraid it would rot. Even though he knew it was a stupid idea, Wright put the meat into the item box anyway, since there was no other choice. He told himself that if the meat spoiled, he'd deal with it later. With no mattress yet, he lay down temporarily on the wooden floor. Wright then realized it was time to search for people in this world, but he wasn't sure if they would be friendly. He understood that a stranger he met might attack him on sight just because of his ugly face. Therefore, he knew he couldn't go out without proper preparation. In the meantime, he decided to focus on brewing magic potions. He had fought the day before without any potions, and it was a horrifying experience he didn't want to repeat. The next morning, Wright walked out of the house with his back hunched. He had slept on the floor last night without a mattress or futon, making his body ache all over. He decided his new mission was to find himself a mattress. After walking through the forest for a while, he happened to find the herb he needed for brewing potions. Coincidentally, this plant grew very close to his house. It was a common plant called Mios herb, ranked as the lowest class among medicinal herbs. However, if properly enchanted and brewed, it could be used to make a level 2 potion. Wright harvested all the Mios herb he could find, and once he had gathered enough, he brought them home to begin the brewing process. First, he crushed the herbs while pouring in a little bit of magic. Then he mixed the plant sap with water and put it on the stove to boil. Rate waited awkwardly while the mixture boiled. Finally, after a long while, he had successfully brewed a level 2 potion. Rate was pleased at how easy it was to make low-level potions. The high-level potions that powerful players in VLO used to create were level 11, and compared to them, a level 2 potion was nothing, about 500 times weaker. However, even a level 2 potion was better than nothing. Still, if possible, he wanted to brew a few level 4 potions, but decided to leave that for later. Rate realized he had made a mistake by not having any containers ready for the potion. So, he used his shaping skill to quickly create a few flasks. He filled 5 flasks with the potion, which would be a great help on the battlefield. After finishing, he stepped out of his house and decided to scout the area to hunt monsters and collect magic stones. These stones would be used to create more useful artifacts. Rate used his enemy search skill to scan the area and took down every monster he came across. He gathered a large number of magic stones, enough to craft many necessary artifacts. The first artifact he decided to create was flashbangs. He started by using his magic to crush a magic stone. This felt like a waste, but he couldn't make a flashbang without breaking the magic stone, so he had no other choice. Rate crushed the magic stones until they became a fine powder, known as mana fragments. The next step was to imbue these fragments with magic. However, even with the magic infusion, the effect was only fleeting, as each fragment emitted a faint light for just a moment. However, combining hundreds of thousands of fragments would create a blinding flash of light. Rate understood that he couldn't use the powder in its raw form, so he used his fusion skill to turn the powder into a solid container. He didn't feel safe with just one flashbang, so he decided to make 3 just to be sure. He continued to crush more magic stones until the next morning. That morning, he was finally done. Although crafting them took all night, it was still much less demanding than creating high-level items. Suddenly, his magic detector started beeping non-stop, which confused him, since he wasn't using any magic at that moment. He immediately realized that someone nearby was using magic. Rate then grabbed his magic detector and his bow and ran quickly in the direction where he sensed the magic. He didn't know who was using the magic, whether they were friend or foe, but he had to go check. However, chances were they weren't friendly. The magic detector pointed in the direction of the strongest magical source, and Rate followed its guidance closely, using his stealth support skill to hide himself. Just then, he heard a scream ring out, telling someone to run from the area because it was dangerous. Rate used this voice to pinpoint the exact location and continued to move closer. He hid on a tree branch and saw an ugly bear monster threatening a father and his children. Rate also noticed an injured man lying on the ground and an extremely beautiful but terrified teenage girl anxiously asking about the man's condition. This man didn't look like a warrior, and to make matters worse, the knight trying to protect them had also been severely wounded in the shoulder, a wound that showed signs of poison. Rate realized that if he didn't act immediately, they would be dead within 5 minutes. Deciding to save them, he quickly gathered information. Before landing on the scene in a cool Batman-style pose, the bear roared upon seeing his frightening face. But Rate wasn't bothered at all. He threw a flashbang, which emitted a blinding light, creating the perfect opportunity to land a stunning blow. Immediately after, he shot out the poison needles he had crafted beforehand. However, Rate quickly realized this monster might be a higher rank than any he had ever faced. Therefore, the poison needles alone certainly wouldn't be enough to take it down. In this situation, Rate decided to increase the poison's dosage and swap the poisoned needle for a poisoned arrow. He knocked the arrow to his bow, aiming straight at the bear, while also warning the girl not to move, unless she wanted to complete this mission by herself. Rate fired an arrow, piercing the bear's back, which drove it mad and forced it to focus all its attention on him. The bear turned into Mike Tyson, starting to throw powerful punches toward Rate. However, Rate skillfully dodged all of its attacks. He waited patiently, His plan was nearing completion. The poison on the arrow was a mixture of 3 different types of Ina magic. The first was a neurotoxin extracted from deathroot, known to be the most potent of the 3. The second was a hemotoxin created from poison mushrooms, intended to ensure the death of monsters that might be immune to neurotoxins. Just as the bear was about to turn Rate into a late lunch, it suddenly froze and stopped its attack. Rat strode majestically past the bear, leaving the completely paralyzed monster behind him. Rat showed off his skills in Power Rangers style. This was all thanks to the third poison, a paralytic agent extracted from the venom sac of a monster frog he had killed earlier. This venom paralyzed the victim, allowing the other poisons time to take effect. It also inhibited brain activity, reducing the monster's pain, so it wouldn't be aware of its own condition until moments before its death. That way, it wouldn't thrash around in desperation, as death was already inevitable. When the survivors regained their sight after the flash from the stun grenade, they were astonished to see the bear collapsed on the ground, while a stranger, thin but mysterious, stood there victoriously. They wondered who this stranger was. The injured soldier hesitantly asked Rate if he was the one who killed the bear. Rate nodded, confirming that he was the one who took it down. He also remarked that since the soldier could still move, the bear's poison must be very slow-acting. However, the deep cut on the soldier's chest looked extremely serious, and he predicted that the victim would die from blood loss before the poison could reach his heart. Raw approached to administer first aid, but the soldier stopped him, saying that even though Rate had saved their lives, he couldn't allow him to come any closer. Rate said he didn't care if they stopped him, reminding them that the injured man on the ground would die if they did nothing. While speaking, Rate referred to the injured man as the old man, which angered the soldier, who said that the injured man was a very important person. Rate retorted that if the man was that important, it would be even worse to let him die. The soldier understood Rate's logic and realized he had no choice but to accept help from this stranger. Finally, the soldier agreed to let Rate help, and although Rate offered no guarantees, he promised to do his best. Rate handed the soldier a potion bottle and told him to give it to the injured man. The soldier took the bottle, smelled it, observed it, and even tasted it to make sure it wasn't harmful. Rate told the soldier to randomly pick any potion bottle and promised that whichever one was chosen, he would drink it to prove it wasn't harmful. The soldier chose a bottle, and Rate downed it in one go. This act from Rate dispelled the soldier's suspicions. The beautiful teenage girl then offered to help, wanting to give the older man, who was actually her father, the potion. After drinking the potion, his wounds immediately began to heal and his face became more handsome. Strangely enough, everyone was amazed by the power of the potion Rate made and wondered if it was a high-tier potion. However, Rate explained that it was just a basic Tier 2 potion. He was surprised, but figured they probably weren't familiar with potion making. Rate then gave the soldier a healing potion, suggesting he drink it since the soldier was also injured. The soldier humbly replied that he was just an ordinary guard, so the potion should be saved for someone who needed it more. Rate bluntly told him to shut up and drink the potion, because he had plenty more. After the soldier finished drinking, he said he was in Rate's debt. However, Rate reminded him that if he didn't deal with the bear's poison quickly, he would still die despite drinking the potion. The soldier was shocked to learn that Rate could do something about the poison. Rate checked on the soldier's condition and asked how far the venom had spread in his body. The soldier replied that he only felt a slight numbness in his fingers. Rate immediately deduced that it was a paralytic poison, and if left untreated, the poison would spread to his heart, causing him to die slowly. However, Rate couldn't brew an antidote right there in the forest, so he offered to take them to his home to prepare an antidote for the bear's venom. The soldier carried the injured man on his back, and the group walked to Rate's house together. Upon entering, they were stunned to see a house like Rate's existing in the middle of this harsh wilderness. Rate commented that although the house was nice, it was still quite empty. Rate urged them to wait in the living room while he went to brew the antidote and bring it to them. The soldier wondered if Rate was a doctor, as he was clearly very knowledgeable about medicine. Rate replied that he wasn't an expert on medicine. He just knew how to do a lot of things. Rate then advised the soldier to watch how the antidote was made if he wanted to ensure his own safety in the future. The soldier accepted the advice, but asked for a few minutes to put the frail old man to bed. A moment later, Rate offered the soldier a drink of water, and he drank it immediately without any hesitation. Rate asked about his condition, and the soldier replied that his entire arm was now completely numb. He worriedly wondered if it was too late to save him. Rate reassured him that there was nothing to worry about, as they had plenty of time. The poison had only spread to his arm, which indicated it was progressing quite slowly. Rate was confident that at its current speed, he would finish brewing the antidote long before it was too late, even though the quality of the herbs he had gathered wasn't great. But if he prepared it carefully, he could still work around the issue. Rate also noted that creativity was key when using low-quality ingredients to make medicine. A moment later, the antidote was ready, and 2 bowls of the medicine were placed in front of the soldier and the girl. The soldier took a drink from one bowl first to make sure it wasn't poisoned. As soon as he drank it, his eyes widened in amazement at the medicine's effect. The paralyzing sensation vanished completely without a trace. Rate then suggested that he give the medicine to the old man, as his condition was more critical, and he wouldn't make it if they didn't act fast. The girl rushed the medicine into her father's room and gave it to him immediately. As a result, the color returned to his face, making him look more youthful than before. Rate then explained that he had neutralized the poison in the old man's system and had administered first aid for his wounds. He assured them that if the man got enough rest, he would wake up soon. Rate gave the girl another vial of medicine, reminding her that it should only be used in an emergency. Once everyone was healed, Rate expressed his desire to talk. He wanted to know who they were and what they were doing in the area where he had found them. The girl spoke up, saying she would explain their identities, but he would have to wait for her father to wake up so he could explain for himself why they were in the forest. The soldier introduced himself as Goldo, a royal guard of the Mythos Kingdom. The girl introduced herself as Lumia Mythos, princess of the Mythos Kingdom, and her father as Lias Mythos, the 14th king of the Mythos Kingdom. Rate was used to avoiding negotiations with high-status people, but this time he was dealing with a king. He realized he had to be careful with his actions and carefully considered what his next move should be. Lumia pleaded with Rate to keep their identities and her father's royal status a secret. Rate decided he no longer wanted to be known by his old name, so he created a new one and introduced himself as Late, a name that sounded similar to his real one. He seemed proud of this clever idea and said that for now, they should wait for the king to wake up, and then they would decide on the next step. Lumia asked Late if he intended to help them. From this question, Late realized that they were in need of some kind of help. Lumia suddenly realized she had let something slip and quickly covered her mouth, while Goldo gave her a disappointed look. Late decided they would discuss that matter later and suggested everyone get something to eat. He was seen outside, taking out the monster frog meat he had stored in his item box earlier, and was surprised that it was still fresh, unlike his completely hopeless hairstyle. It turned out that food stored in the item box didn't spoil and remained perfectly fresh. A moment later, he began roasting the meat over a campfire. Princess Lumia came over to his side, curiously asking what he was doing. Late calmly replied that he was preparing monster frog skewers, but he didn't know the creature's name. Lumia was stunned at the thought of eating a monster whose name they didn't even know. Late added that there was no risk of poisoning since he already had antidotes prepared. Lumia was impressed by his logical thinking, which surprised Late, as he thought she would complain that such a meal wasn't fit for a princess like her. Just then, Goldo appeared and suddenly turned into a karate master, delivering a sharp chop through the air between Late and Lumia, separating them. He warned Lumia not to fall for Late's tricks, stressing that he himself was once a commoner. He said that normal people don't just casually eat unidentified monsters. However, Late paid no attention to Goldo's words and continued eating the frog meat, remarking that the fatty parts made the dish more tender and delicious. Goldo added that they didn't have any food reserves with them and blurted out that they were in a complicated situation. Late quickly picked up on that, but decided to wait for the king to awaken for a proper interrogation. Late once again offered the meat to Goldo, asking him to test if it was poisoned, as he sensed that despite helping them, they still didn't fully trust him. Goldo accepted, and with the very first bite, the gloomy life of a royal guard suddenly transformed into the fantastic daydream of a bored, middle-aged man. A sunny day at the beach with a gorgeous woman chasing after him. Goldo praised Late's meat, saying it was delicious. Lumia then asked Goldo if she could have Late's meat, the cooked kind, not in the metaphorical sense. Goldo nodded his approval, since he hadn't experienced any issues with the food. Lumia was about to eat, but then had a thought. Wait a minute, I'm a princess. She requested that Late provide a plate for her to eat from. Late quickly used his creation skill to whip up a plate on the spot. Both Goldo and Lumia were stunned by the way Late created an object out of thin air. Lumia took a bite and her mind took flight into a fantasy, just as Goldo's had. However, her fantasy was rather strange. She was in a bikini, having a romantic time with a bizarre frogman. A few minutes later, Late noticed Goldo had stopped eating, so he asked what was wrong. Goldo replied that as a royal guard, he shouldn't eat when rations were scarce. Late assured him there was more than enough of his meat to go around for everyone. No innuendo intended. Goldo immediately agreed and explained that he felt more indebted to Late than an Ivy League student is to their student loans. Goldo added that even in his own castle, there was no meat as delicious as what they had just eaten. Lumia recalled Late saying it was frog meat, and she was surprised that frogs from this forest could taste so good. Lumia wondered if it could be a Gallia frog. Goldo reminded her that Gallia frogs are very difficult to prepare, and they aren't a species that just anyone can easily find in the forest. However, Lumia said she had eaten Gallia frogs before, and they tasted exactly like the frog dish that Late had cooked. She also recalled that when they were in the castle, the king had requested this dish once, but out of hundreds of royal chefs, only one could make it edible. Late was curious and asked, "So what makes it so hard to prepare?" Goldo explained that inside a Gallia frog's body, there are about 10 fragile poison sacs. If even one sac is accidentally torn, the entire frog becomes contaminated with poison and cannot be eaten. The method for preparing a Gallia frog sounded familiar to Late. So he took out the frog meat he had hunted and asked if it was a Gallia frog. Lumia and Goldo were astonished to realize that it was indeed a real Gallia frog, and what's more, its body was completely unharmed. Late handed the frog to Goldo, shoving it right in his face, which pissed Goldo off because of Late's audacity. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, startling Late since he wasn't expecting anyone to visit his home so abruptly. Goldo shouted to ask who was outside the door. A voice replied that he recognized Goldo's voice and introduced himself as Rasel, his comrade. Goldo told Rasel to come in, and a boy who looked like he'd skipped every gym day walked in. It was Rasel, another royal guard in the royal family. Rasel saw Princess Lumia and was relieved that she was safe and sound. Goldo asked Rasel if he had found any help. Rasel replied that he hadn't found anyone yet, and this was the first house he had come across. When he knocked, he found out that everyone was inside. Rasel then stared at Late and asked suspiciously what this stranger was doing here with the princess. He also wondered about this place, as it seemed strange to him. Goldo explained that this was Late's house. Rasel was confused upon hearing the name and wondered if Late was a friend or a foe. Goldo clarified that Late was just a commoner, although he didn't look like an ordinary person. Princess Lumia added that Late had helped them a great deal. He had killed the monster that attacked them and healed everyone's wounds. Even the king was currently resting in one of Late's rooms. The king had been poisoned by the monster, but Late had created an incredibly effective antidote, and thanks to that, the king would be fine. Rasel was suspicious of the strange convenience of a stranger like Late just happening to appear and being so eager to help. He suspected that Late had a hidden agenda and urged Goldo and the princess to leave this place immediately. Lumia reminded Raisal that the forest was teeming with dangerous monsters, and there was no place safer than this house. She was also displeased with the way Raisal spoke about the person who had saved both her and her father's lives. Raisal was shocked by the way the princess raised her voice at him, as it was very rare for her to get so angry. Late then opened and closed the window to prove that they weren't being held captive. He made it clear that if he truly had ill intentions, he wouldn't have let them move freely in an unlocked room. However, Raisal still didn't buy Late's story. Late calmly said that if he really wanted to, he could kill all of them even if they attacked him together. But he wasn't doing that because he had no intention of doing so. He used Raisal as an example, pointing out that he had let his guard down and had many openings. Late emphasized that if he wanted to, he could kill Raisal right here and now. Finally, Late mocked Raisal, calling him a pathetic weakling, while praising Goldo as the strongest in the group. However, Late said that it would still take him about 10 seconds to kill Raisal with just the weapons at hand. Raisal angrily warned Late to watch his mouth, calling him a filthy and arrogant bastard. Just as Raisal was about to attack, Princess Lumia stepped between them, demanding they both shut up, especially Raisal, as she was not pleased with how he was treating Late, the man who had saved their lives. Lumia ordered Goldo that if Raisal dared to disobey her again, he was to behead him on the spot for treason. Goldo took the order seriously, drew his sword, and placed it on Raisal's neck. Terrified, Raisal knelt down and begged Lumia for forgiveness. Late realized that there was more to Lumia than met the eye. Until now, she had behaved like a normal young woman, but now she had shown a frightening side. Although the issue was resolved, Late could still feel the hostility from Raisal, and he decided he had to do something to extinguish this feud. He asked Princess Lumia for permission to challenge Raisal to a duel and proposed that the match would have no rules. Raisal still harbored resentment, vowing to make Late pay for his arrogance. However, Late realized he stood no chance against a skilled knight in a fair fight, so he decided to play dirty. Late explained that this wasn't a battle to the death, but just a match for them to understand each other better, all for the noble purpose of sparring. In reality, it meant nothing to Late. He just didn't want to kill the princess's guard in this situation, as it would be a huge mistake to do so. Princess Lumia thought about Late's request and recalled that, although Raisal wasn't quite ready to be a true knight, he still possessed formidable strength. Goldo agreed with the princess and emphasized that Raisal was ranked in the top 3 of their elite royal knight order and should not be underestimated. A short while later, they all went out to the backyard. Raisal reminded Late that he had stated there would be no rules for this match and just wanted to confirm it, as he was itching for a fight to blow off some steam. Late replied that the rules would remain the same, and he challenged Raisal to attack him with the intent to kill. He wasn't worried because he had instant healing potions ready. He then held up a potion for Raisal to see, making Raisal think to himself, "What the heck is this?" Princess Lumia explained that it was a level 1 recovery potion, and it worked very effectively. Raisal was shocked to learn that a supposed commoner like Late possessed such a high-level potion, and began to suspect whether Late was truly a commoner. Goldo commented that he also suspected Late was more than just an ordinary commoner, since the potions he possessed were enough to keep a normal person living comfortably for the rest of their life. Raisal then asked Late if he was a physician, because in this world, those who concocted potions were called physicians, especially since Late had even prepared an antidote. Goldo guessed that Late used to be a private physician for a kingdom, but Raisal doubted that, as it was unlikely a kingdom would let go of a physician who possessed something as precious as a level 1 recovery potion. Late found the conversation about physicians very strange, because in his world, such people were called alchemists. Goldo and Raisal continued to speculate that Late was a physician who had fled his kingdom and hidden in the forest, which Late found absurd. However, He'd rather they think that than know the truth that he came from another world. Late let out a loud cough to get their attention and reminded them that he didn't appreciate them digging into his past. He also stressed that he wanted the match to start immediately. Goldo volunteered to be the referee for the match. A few minutes later, the match officially began. Both fighters got into their ready stances and stared into each other's eyes. In Late's left hand, he was already holding a flashbang, and just a few seconds later, he threw it at Raisel to blind him and create an opening to attack. While Raisel was temporarily blinded, Late snuck up behind him and prepared to deliver a downward strike. However, Raisel still managed to block the attack, despite being unable to see. Late was impressed and had to admit that Raisel was indeed an excellent knight. Immediately after, Raisel swung his sword, aiming straight for Late's throat. Late understood that a true swordsman could sense an enemy's presence, and it was clear that Raisel had reached that level, even though he was only 20 years old. This explained why Raisel was able to block Late's attack. On second thought, defeating Raisel wouldn't be too difficult for Late. All he needed to do was hide his presence, get close enough, and then stab his opponent in the neck. However, Late felt that this duel would only be meaningful if he won by clearly demonstrating the disparity in their power. Late realized Raisel had placed great faith in his sword, so the only way to win was to destroy that very sword. He felt confident in his ability to win the duel. When their swords clashed, Raisel had no choice but to admit Late was a formidable opponent. But Late smiled and said that he could go even further. Both their swords were locked in place, and the fight now depended on raw strength. Raisel warned Late that he couldn't win with brute force alone, but Late disagreed. In an instant, Late used his weapon to completely shatter Raisel's sword, leaving Raisel gasping in shock. Late leaped into the air, intending to deliver the final finishing blow, but suddenly Goldo yelled, "Game over," signaling that the fight had gone too far. Late held back his attack and walked away, knowing he had defeated Raisel perfectly. Late had used theft magic during the fight, a technique that shouldn't be used in a prolonged battle because it puts immense strain on the human body. This time, he only suffered mild muscle pain, but if he had used it against a higher-level opponent, his body would have been in excruciating pain. So, he silently thanked his lucky stars that Raisel was such a mediocre loser. Late turned back and saw Raisel crying because his sword had been destroyed, wondering why his sword had broken so easily. Late replied that he had used a special technique to break the sword, but that was actually a lie. He had used transformation magic to shatter the sword. Goldo then admitted that he hadn't seen Late use any special sword techniques, and he couldn't believe Late was strong enough to pull that off. Late then asked about Raisel's sword, whether it was considered a good one. Goldo replied that it was a masterpiece, forged by a master blacksmith, and that Raisel had received it upon his promotion to Royal Knight. After hearing this, Late felt a pang of regret for having broken the sword, and offered to fix it. But when Late picked up a piece of the sword, Raisel angrily snatched it from his hand. However, Raisel acted foolishly, grabbing the blade with his bare hand and cutting his fingers. Clearly, Raisel was still holding a grudge and started to walk away, but Princess Lumia ordered him to stop, asking him if he wasn't ashamed of himself for acting like a coward. The princess scolded Raisel for not only insulting Late earlier, but also for the way he behaved after his defeat, which was a disgrace to the entire kingdom. Princess Lumia then bowed her head and apologized to Late, taking responsibility for Raisel's foolish behavior. Goldo advised the princess not to bow for too long and reminded her of her royal status. Lumia then asked Goldo what the appropriate punishment would be for Raisel's shameful conduct. Goldo replied that Raisel had repeatedly disobeyed orders, and his actions were a disgrace to the kingdom, so the death penalty was unavoidable. Hearing this, Lumia's eyes widened in shock, just as Late had predicted. Since Lumia was only 15 years old, she didn't want to execute someone she had known for a long time. Instead, Lumia suggested finding an alternative punishment to execution, but Goldo reminded her that according to the kingdom's law, A knight who dishonors the royal order of knights must face the death penalty. Even Raisel agreed and accepted his fate. Suddenly, Late got everyone's attention and said there was no need to kill anyone. He thought to himself that this law was too strict. If the death penalty was applied for rude words, the entire population of Earth would have been wiped out long ago. He understood that the Order of Knights was responsible for protecting the royal family, so such strictness was somewhat justified. However, Late could sense that Princess Lumia didn't truly want to execute Raisel. At the same time, if the king woke up to find a royal knight had been executed, it could negatively affect the upcoming negotiations. Although Late was under no obligation to protect Raisel, but he figured protecting Raisel might be beneficial in some way. He stressed that he was the victim, but he didn't care about what had happened. Goldo said the matter was far more serious, as it involved the royal knights. He placed a hand on his chest and recounted how the royal knights were formed to protect the royal family. He also explained that disgracing the order's honor was the same as insulting the royal family, which was why their rules were so strict. Late immediately understood that the issue was about honor and reputation. He then told Goldo that the only people who witnessed Raisel's cowardly and useless behavior were him and Lumia. Therefore, if the three of them kept quiet, no one else would find out. Lumia and Late both agreed to keep it a secret, making sure no one else found out about the incident. Goldo thought for a moment, then proposed that the princess entrust Raisel's life to him and Late. He explained that the royal knights had an exception that allowed for a punishment to be postponed if the offender was assigned a mission. Late immediately understood Goldo's logic. The execution would be delayed until the mission was completed, and if the mission never ended, the punishment would never be carried out. However, to do this, they needed the consent of both the victim and the accused. Once the exception was approved, Goldo would decide the details of the mission as he saw fit. Raisel then bowed his head in shame and gave his thanks. Goldo then reminded Raisel that if he ever did it again, he would lose his head and it would be served on a platter. He also told Late that if he ever changed his mind, he just had to say the word, and Raisel would be executed on the spot. Late was surprised to realize he suddenly held the power of life and death over Raisel, when his original plan was just to show off a little in a practice match. He never imagined things would escalate this far. That afternoon, Late brought another bowl of water for Princess Lumia, so she could wash her unconscious father's face. As Late touched the bed, he asked Lumia if the bed felt a bit hard. Lumia sat down to feel it, then remarked that she found all the furniture in the house to be first class. Late smiled and said he planned to use a piece of Raisel's sword to make an even better bed. Raisel's sword had been confiscated and given to Late after the earlier dispute. This was an order from Princess Lumia, and Raisel couldn't disobey unless he wanted to die. So, however unwilling, he was forced to hand the sword over to Late. Lumia thought Late would use the sword to make a metal frame for the bed, but he used it for the mattress instead. She immediately thought he was planning to use it for torture and reminded him that even with a just cause, torture was illegal, unless you were acquainted with the royal family, in which case you might get away with it. Late assured her that he wasn't going to torture anyone and was just making a normal bed. Lumia must have imagined a bed with swords sticking out of the mattress, which sounded crazy but wasn't actually a bad idea. Just kidding. Then, Late used transmutation magic to create springs, which would act as the support for the mattress. As he was getting things ready, Raisel watched him crafting with the sword, and as if he couldn't look any worse, his face twisted into an extremely ugly expression. Just then, Goldo shouted his name, demanding Raisel get back to work. Before long, Late finished installing the springs for the mattress, covered it with a sheet, and used magic to fuse everything together. When he was done, he sat on the bed and commented on how comfortable it was, then suggested Lumia give it a try. Lumia watched in amazement, seeing that Late had crafted this incredible bed from pieces of a metal sword. She sat down, and the springs bounced her up into the air. When she landed, Lumia excitedly remarked that she had never seen such a wonderful and soft bed in her entire life. Lumia began to praise Late, not only for his ability to craft amazing potions, but also for making an excellent bed from sword fragments. He realized that if he mass-produced them, he could make a huge profit. But he wasn't really interested in the idea. Late told Lumia he was going to go around the house and make a few more beds like it, since he had some free time. After Late left, Lumia jumped on the bed like a little child, which in fact she was. She even tried lying in all sorts of positions, sleeping positions of course. Just then, Late came back in and tossed her a pillow he had just made. Lumia hugged the soft pillow tightly and blushed as she watched Late leave the room. A little later, Lumia saw Late working and had a request, but she hesitated to ask. Late noticed this and asked her if she needed something. Finally, Lumia asked in a small voice if she could take the bed back to the royal palace. Late was surprised that she was so hesitant over just a bed. He said it was no problem. As long as he had enough materials, he could make as many as she wanted. This made Lumia overjoyed, and she thanked him while hugging her pillow tightly. Meanwhile, Raisel was being worked to exhaustion. The next morning, Lumia was surprised to see that her father was awake. The king was also stunned to find himself still in one piece. Late explained to him that it was all thanks to a grade 2 potion that he had brewed himself. The king laughed out loud in disbelief, finding it impossible to believe that a commoner could create such a potion. King Lias then demanded that Late prove his skills by crafting a potion right before their eyes. Late agreed, but on the condition that the king explain why he was injured in the forest. The king stared at Late with a cold gaze, asking if he dared to bargain with the king. However, the king's stern look quickly turned into a smile, and he accepted Late's request. But only after he successfully crafted a true level 2 potion. Lumia worriedly asked her father if he was sure about this decision. King Lias reassured his daughter, saying that he truly needed help and that a physician capable of brewing a level 2 potion would be very useful to him. They went into the kitchen together, where Late began crafting the potion. He laid the ingredients on the table, including mejia grass as the main base. Then Late put the grass into a bowl and started grinding it with a pestle. The king praised his skillful execution. Late humbly replied that it was because he was a professional physician, though that was just a lie. Once he finished grinding and achieved the desired consistency, he began to boil the mixture. The potion continued to boil until nightfall, and finally, it was complete. The potion had a transparent red color, indicating that it was a genuine level 2 potion. He then poured the potion into a vial, ready to be used. The king offered to test the potion, even though he wasn't injured. King Lias took a knife and cut his own palm, causing Goldo and Lumia to cry out in worry for him. He opened the vial and poured it onto the wound. The cut healed instantly. Even Late was surprised that the king would test it on himself as if he were just a commoner. The king then said that he couldn't test it on others, and if the potion truly worked, then there was nothing to worry about. The king, the princess, and Late sat down to talk. King Lias decided to keep his promise by explaining their situation. However, Late had to swear not to reveal the contents of their conversation. Late agreed, and the king finally confessed that their mission here was an assassination. The king revealed that the prince's bodyguard was murdered by a mage named Satarx, who used teleportation magic. Although the king was skilled in combat, he couldn't react fast enough and was injured. Now, Late understood that they were on an assassination mission and were relying on teleportation magic to accomplish it. However, teleportation magic isn't strong enough to kill someone, but if a trap is set before teleporting, even the highest level players can be eliminated. After the king finished his story, Goldo immediately knelt and apologized for not risking his life to protect the king. Lias told Goldo to raise his head, reassuring him that no one could have protected him in that situation. The king then assumed that it was Goldo who had defeated the monster in the forest. Goldo immediately corrected him, saying that it was Late who had killed the monster. Lias was surprised to learn that a supposed physician could take down a monster. Late replied calmly, saying that all he did was use poison. At that moment, the king recalled that he had suffered a fatal wound from the bear, and wondered if it had all just been a dream.